2311 Racing still feel confident that they will get a second charter before the 2022 season. Chip Ganassi Racing confirms that Jimmie Johnson will run the 2022 Indianapolis 500. And Roush Fenway Racing confirms that Ryan Newman will not return to their organization in 2022. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to another video. We've got a ton of NASCAR stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. First off, Sebastian Arias. As Sebastian Arias is negotiation with an ARCA team for next season to run full-time. Sebastian Arias will be making his ARCA West debut this weekend at Phoenix tomorrow night. Will be making his debut and will be driving for Bill McAnally Racing in the 5 car. Sebastian Arias is a 21-year-old Colombian racing driver who is trying to become the next Juan Montoya from Colombia, trying to make his way through the ranks and trying to become a very successful driver. I'm not sure how he's going to do, to be honest. I've not seen him race in top-tier equipment before. Like I said, this is his first ever ARCA West debut, so he'll be looking to try to have a really good run at the Bill McAnally Racing organization. There's not as many good drivers in the field, though you're going to have drivers like Ty Gibbs and probably like guys like Zane Smith and other drivers from other respective series that are probably going to be running this weekend. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but good luck to him. Hopefully Sebastian Arias will have a good run in his debut, and hopefully he will do very well this weekend and have a good run this upcoming weekend at Phoenix. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Randall Howard. As Randall Howard has been suspended by NASCAR due to substance abuse issues, he's been suspended indefinitely by NASCAR. For those who don't know, Randall Howard is the hauler driver for our motorsports. And when it comes to a situation like this, NASCAR takes something like this extremely seriously. You can't be driving under the influence, regardless of substance, or have substances in your system and be a hauler driver in NASCAR. So I think absolutely NASCAR is doing the right thing. They have to keep safety on their side, and I'm really happy they have done this. We've seen people get suspended for smaller things. We've seen people get suspended for substance abuse. Guys like Jeremy Mayfield have gotten suspended. AJ Allmendinger has gotten suspended for substance abuse. So NASCAR, absolutely, in my opinion, doing the right call to take something like this, and also myself, by the way. They have taken stuff like this very seriously. They're not going to play around with this kind of stuff, and I'm really happy about this. Considering we had Henry Ruggs basically get involved in a car accident, and, you know, he absolutely did. But at the same time, I'm glad that NASCAR in its own decided to do this. I'm really happy about it for sure, and I'm glad that NASCAR took this very seriously. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Chris Hacker. As Chris Hacker is going to be driving a 33 for Ram Brothers Racing this weekend at Phoenix. There had not originally been an entry that had been announced at the time. There had been talk behind the scenes that maybe Jacques Villeneuve was potentially going to drive the 33 for the Ram Brothers organization, and now Chris Hacker will be driving the 33. Now, Chris Hacker has made a couple starts so far in the truck series. He's made 3 starts. They haven't entirely been that impressive. I've heard, though, that he had top 20 speed in a Ram Brothers truck at Gateway despite going 10 laps down to engine and electrical issues. They unfortunately did not get a good run because of electrical problems. So Chris Hacker is getting another opportunity at the Ram Brothers organization. So I really do hope he does really well. I hope he at least is able to finish race. I hope this car actually can make it to the checker flag. Because if they can make it to the checker flag, they honestly could have a very strong run this weekend. So I'm wishing the best of luck. Good luck to them. Hopefully Chris Hacker will have a strong enough run to, and as a whole, contend for the victory. Well, not contend for victory, but at least try to get to the checker flag. And hopefully he will have a very strong run this weekend at Phoenix. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the purses for this weekend at Phoenix. So, for the Truck Series race tonight, the purse is going to be $908,000 and $369. For Xfinity, it's going to be $1,622,583. And for the Cup Series, it's going to be $10,053,801 for the purses in the NASCAR Cup Series. One thing I really like that NASCAR has been doing, especially over the last couple weeks, as they have been establishing how much money is going to be going out. I would assume that this is coming with the new charter agreement, because remember, they extended it after 2021 through 2024. So I think NASCAR is being told that they're going to have to go ahead and start showing those purses, which to me, I think at least is a really solid thing that they're doing it. And $10 million, especially for the championship race, really isn't a bad thing as a whole. It is quite a bit of money that they are going to be going ahead and handing out. So I'm really happy about that for sure. They're showing the purses that are going to be for this weekend. I'm really happy about that as a whole, and I'm glad we get to see what money is going to be going into these upcoming races. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about DC Solar. Now, DC Solar has been in a really, really big case, and we'll talk about this. So, it was reported by Bob Pockers that bankruptcy trustee seeks $20,547,257 from Chip Ganassi Racing for sponsorship dollars paid primarily from 2016 to 2019. It's trustee's job to get back dollars fraudulently obtained from investors. Now, for those who have been following the DC Solar story, I haven't really talked much about this, but DC Solar, the guy who basically ran it, Jeff Karpoff, basically ran it out of the garage, and they sponsored NASCAR for 4 years. But at the end of 2018, they got in a lot of trouble. The FBI investigated them, and they were found to what they were trying to sell was not entirely true. And unfortunately, their operation got told, and he is expected to go to prison for a very, very long time. But the case really has not gone through because the guy's gotten COVID. Then they've delayed the case multiple times. I really do not think that DC Solar really has a ground to stand on, though. Again, I understand that they're looking to try to collect the money back that they lost. But at the same time, I don't entirely understand what grounds DC Solar really has on there. Because they honestly, and I hope that Chip Ganassi really does countersue them, because they really don't have a legal standpoint in a legal case, in my honest opinion. So, I'm not entirely understand what DC Solar is trying to do here. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that they think, as a whole, that they can overall get away with this. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. They should not be able to get away with something like this, especially since they're the ones who did illegal stuff. Chip Ganassi Racing did not do illegal stuff. I just don't entirely understand why they potentially are going to get away with something like this, because this is seriously ridiculous in my opinion. And I hope that Chip Ganassi Racing countersues them, because DC, they don't deserve this. I hope the track countersues them, because they absolutely deserve to be countersued, in my honest opinion. But it is what it is, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens. It goes through. The case is actually not supposed to happen, I think, for a couple months now. So we'll wait and see what happens. Hopefully things will go through very, very soon, and we'll find out more information on this, and hopefully Chip Ganassi will countersue them. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Rick Hendrick and Hendrick Motorsports. Now, Rick Hendrick said in the media, and he was asked about the situation with Liberty University, and he says he stands by Liberty University despite lawsuits and the scrutiny that they've been going through, saying that they will eventually figure out the issues that they're going through, and they'll figure out what is going on. Now, for those of you who have not been following the Liberty University story, Hendrick Motorsports signed a 5-year contract extension with the company because William Byron has been invested in that because he went to school for them and went to school and went there in college. And Liberty University's come under a lot of fire for certain situations that I'm really not going to get into, and stuff that is a very, very serious that I should not be discussing. But at the same time, Rick Hendrick, since they got a 5-year contract extension and bringing a lot of money, they're going to stand by them. I don't entirely agree with Rick Hendrick on this decision, because in all seriousness, this stuff that's going on is very, very serious. And the guy that runs it, Jerry Falwell, isn't really the best guy from what I've heard. So I'm not entirely understand why he's standing by this. I would have thought maybe, hey, Rick Hendrick, maybe drop it. But especially when it comes to sponsorship and funding, I entirely understand why he's going to stand by it. It brings a lot of money and sponsor. But at the same time, I don't entirely understand why he's probably going to get away with this and why they're going to keep the sponsorship. But just my opinion on the situation, and that's the situation with Liberty University. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the 2022 Whelen Modified Tour schedule that was officially revealed on Wednesday. So, the season is going to kick off at New Smyrna. We already knew this, but it will kick off on February 12th at New Smyrna, followed by Richmond on April 1st. Then a couple weeks later, we'll go to Langley on April 23rd. And then a few weeks later, we'll go to Riverhead on May 14th, followed by Jennerstown on May 28th. Then we'll go to Mono Dock on June 18th. Then followed by Riverhead again on June 25th. Then we'll go to Wall Stadium on July 9th. Then we'll go to New Hampshire a week later on July 16th. And then we'll go to have 2 races that have not been announced at this time. That will happen on July 30th and August 6th. Followed by Thompson on August 17th. Then we'll go to Oswego on September 3rd. Then we'll go to Riverhead on September 17th. Then we'll go to a track that has not been announced on September 24th. And then it'll be about a month. But then the season will end about a week before the end of the Cup Series Championship at Martinsville on October 27th, I believe, on Thursday early that week. I really like the schedule. It's a lot of diverse. Again, the Whelen Modified Tour schedule, their tracks are really not that big, but I think they have a lot of really good tracks. And for the first time, I think, on their schedule, they are going to New Smyrna, which I think is really, really exciting. Also ending the season in Martinsville for the Whelen Modified Tour. That is a perfect track to end it. I know that last year they ended this, this year, they actually ended the season at Richmond, but I'm very happy to say that Martinsville, a track that I think that deserves a lot more credit than it gets. It absolutely deserves to be the season finale, and it's going to be a great track to end the season for the Whelen Modified Tour. There's going to be a lot of intensity and excitement around that event, and for as a whole, I'm very, very happy about it. I'm looking forward to the Whelen Modified Tours. I really like the schedule, and I'm looking forward to the Whelen Modified Tour season in 2022. I think they've got 16 races, which I don't remember how many races they had this year. I think they had 14. So I think they are increasing the amount of races the Whelen Modified Tour is happening next year. So really, really exciting about that. I'm looking forward to the Whelen Modified Tour, which will kick off in February 12th, which will be a couple days before the Daytona. Actually going to be the week before everything begins, and it'll be during Super Bowl weekend as a whole. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Randall Burnett. As Randall Burnett is going to miss this weekend's race because of COVID-19 protocols, and Andrew Dickinson will be substituting for him as a crew chief this weekend at Phoenix. Randall Burnett, for those who don't know, has been the crew chief for Tyler Reddick this year and has been the crew chief for Tyler Reddick pretty much for a majority of his career since Tyler Reddick got over to Richard Childress Racing in 2019. Randall Burnett, I think, has been a very, very solid and a very key piece to the success of him this year. The team has been absolutely incredible this year. They made the playoffs here Tyler Reddick made the playoffs for the first time. They got eliminated around of 16. But Tyler Reddick has also been really, really extremely well in these playoffs and has shown a lot of speed. Without Randall Burnett being there, I'm not sure how he's going to do. I believe that Andrew Dickinson has not really had any experience as a whole being a crew chief in NASCAR. I believe this will be the first time he's getting crew chief experience. Now, the engineering side of things, the guy knows how to get it done. They've had a lot of good cars. The RCR camp has done a really good job, especially since the Hendrick and ECR combination happened. They've worked very, very well together. So that's at least a positive right there. But at the same time, I just hope that he can do very, very well. Wishing Randall Burnett the best. Hope he have a speedy recovery. We're at the last race of the year, so it is the last race. So he probably will be from the headquarters or something like that. We don't entirely know. But Randall Burnett not going to be in this weekend. COVID-19 protocols. NASCAR is required. I'm not sure how many days he's out, but he'll be out for the rest of the season. The season ends in a couple of days, and Randall Burnett will not be crew chiefing for this upcoming race at Phoenix. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Brad Keselowski. Now, Brad Keselowski released a few posts regarding him leaving Team Penske, going to Roush. He basically said, he had a LinkedIn that came out, said he walked out of the shop for the last time, cried tears of joy, cried tears walking out of there, and also sent a video thanking Team Penske for an incredible 12 years. Brad Keselowski, for all we know that he will be going to Roush Racing in 2022 to be a co-owner / driver of the organization, driving the 6 car on a full-time basis next year. But Brad Keselowski's success at Team Penske was absolutely incredible. Won 34 of his Cup Series races, won a championship in 2012, winning Penske's first Cup Series championship, and also getting Team Penske's first ever NASCAR Xfinity Series championship in 2010. Brad Keselowski's been a driver that I think is going to remember for a very, very long time. One of the most successful drivers in the organization. Now, like we know, he'll be moving over to Roush Racing next year, and I think he's going to bring a lot to the table to the Roush Racing camp in 2022. He's going to be a driver that knows how to get it done, knows setups. I'm not expecting Brad Keselowski to be a championship contender in the first year, but he may be a surprise contender to make the playoffs next year, not just at the Super Speedways, where I think he probably will get a win to get into the playoffs next year. I predict that he will probably win next year, at least on a Super Speedway. But I think that Brad Keselowski is going to be very, very fast on other types of tracks as well, considering we've also seen the Roush camp make major improvements in many, many ways on their cars, and they've shown a lot of speed. So I think Brad is going to bring a lot of table to the Roush camp next year, and over time, he's going to have more of an ownership stake in the organization. Eventually, when Jack Roush does retire, he's hopefully going to be taking over for that organization in the future. Now, Brad Keselowski, like I said, at this team, it just feels so crazy to think that Brad Keselowski, who's been with this team for such a long time and had such a ton of success at the Team Penske organization, and now the fact that he's going to be retiring at the end of this year, it really, not retiring, but leaving the Team Penske camp at the end of this year, is really starting to sink in for a lot of people. And again, it does really suck that he is going to be leaving the Team Penske camp, but he's going to new greener pastures. I don't think his competitive career is coming to an end, but the fact that Brad's leaving just feels crazy because he's been with the team for such a long time, really since 2009. So Brad's obviously going to be leaving at the end of this year, go to Roush. He'll be racing for the final time with Team Penske. It's also the last race for like Chip Ganassi Racing, which we'll talk about here a little bit on the channel in regards to their future. But Randall, Brad Keselowski, unfortunately, leaving to go to Roush. He had a great career at Team Penske. He's going over to Roush next year, and it's really, really exciting, but it sucks he's leaving Team Penske. Now we're going to move on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about AJ Allmendinger. As he says, in addition to running full-time at Xfinity in 2022, he says he will likely run 12 to 15 Cup Series races in 2022 in the second Kaulig racing car. It's unclear what the number is going to be for that second car, what the number really is going to be for the first car. It's expected that Justin Lee is going to have the 16. We don't know what the number is going to be for the second car. But the fact that AJ is going to run almost more than a third of the year, close to half a season next year, is really, really exciting. Now, we know for sure they'll probably run all the road courses next year, but other races he's going to run. Is he going to run the Clash later this year and next year? Is he going to run next year maybe like the All-Star race? Because he's probably going to run the All-Star race. That one, because since he won it, the Indy road course, he's probably going to run that race. But, man, the fact that AJ is going to run 12 to 15 Cup Series races, the fact that he's going to be running next year that much is really, really exciting. I think he absolutely is going to win at least one or even I'm surprised maybe even 2 wins next year. Because he won the Indy road course, so probably be the favorite for that event, despite some of the guys that really ran up front of that, like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott. He's going to probably win at least a race or 2 next year. The guy still knows how to get it done on road courses. He's an excellent driver, and the fact and he's going to be competing at almost half the season again, because I know people have said he should run full-time again in the NASCAR Cup Series, and AJ doesn't want to do that, but the fact he's also going to be in there to help develop the team, because he's been with the team for the last couple of years, and really ever since he got into that team, this team really has taken off over the last couple of years. It does help they've gotten a lot of key pieces to help them out over the last couple of years, but the fact they have a guy like AJ Allmendinger to help out their organization going into next year for almost half a season in their Cup program, a guy that's been in NASCAR for a long time, is really exciting. I think he's going to win a lot of Cup races next year, and we'll wait to see what happens. But the other questions is what's going to happen with the rest of the team next year with that second car? What other drivers are going to get? We'll have to wait and see what happens. But AJ running a lot of the year next year, I think is really, really awesome. I'm really excited about that as a whole. And I'm looking forward to that for sure, because I think that's really, really cool and really exciting at the same time. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Billy Scott. Now, Denny Hamlin was asked about Billy Scott being potentially the crew chief for Kurt Busch next year, and he says he cannot answer that question legally. Now, we know next year that Matt McCall is going to be the crew chief for Brad Keselowski. Now, Jenna Fryer laid out some details when that was announced that Billy Scott is most likely going to be the crew chief for Kurt Busch next year. Now, Billy Scott actually has worked with Kurt Busch. Now, Billy Scott does have 214 NASCAR Cup Series starts as a crew chief, and he only has 1 win. But that only win came in 2018 with Kurt Busch at Bristol, when Kurt Busch went on to make the round of 8 and had a pretty successful season. And it looks like Kurt Busch would like to work with Billy Scott once again because of what he said. Now, Billy Scott, like I said, he's been a decent crew chief. The last time I remember Billy Scott, though, he was working as one of the main guys who worked at the RCR camp. I think he left that camp around 2019 or the end of 2020, and now looks like he probably will be the crew chief for Kurt Busch. Billy Scott's definitely an interesting case. Now, there are definitely better crew chiefs that I think Kurt Busch could work with. A guy like Cole Pearn, perhaps, who's been in the Toyota stable, would definitely be a good choice. I maybe thought Tony Gibson, who worked with Kurt Busch in the past, he was his crew chief when he won the Daytona 500 2017. And had pretty good success with him. But Billy Scott isn't a terrible choice. I know a lot of people are not overall a big fan of Billy Scott just because Billy Scott and people don't know how great of a crew chief he is. He wasn't that great with H. Scott Motorsports. But at the same time, you got to at least be intrigued to see how he's going to do, because I think Kurt Busch, no doubt, going into next year, he's going to be a great asset to the team. The big question is, can Billy Scott and Kurt Busch gel enough to not have any problems, and can they be very, very successful in their first year? That's one thing that we're going to have to wait and see upon what happens. But it's really good to see that Billy Scott will probably be the crew chief for Kurt Busch next year. I think it will help their organization going forward. And hopefully, Billy Scott can come into the team and work at Kurt Busch very, very well. And they can also come in there and help Bubba Wallace become a very successful driver going into next year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Dave Ellis. As Noah Gragson confirmed during media day that Dave Ellis will not be returning to crew chief for Noah Gragson in 2022, as Dave Ellis is going to become the crew chief for an unnamed Cup Series team in 2022, and a replacement will be announced at some point for Noah Gragson going into next year. This is really, really shocking to me because Dave Ellis has been the crew chief for that number 9 car since around, I believe, in 2014. I think it was around 2017 or 2018 when he started crew chiefing for Tyler Reddick when he won a championship with Tyler Reddick in 2018 when they only won 2 races. And Noah Gragson and Dave Ellis have really gelled together, and Dave Ellis has been in the junior motorsports camp since around 2017 and 2018 when he also won a championship with William Byron, by the way. My big question is, where is Dave Ellis going to go? I have one team that I think Dave Ellis is going to go through, and they said an unnamed Cup Series team. I think he's going to remain in the Chevy camp, and I think that Dave Ellis is actually going to go in crew chief for GMS Racing, crew chief for Ty Dillon next year. Just think about it. There's been no crew chief announcement for Ty Dillon. We know that Ty Dillon is going to be driving full-time in the Cup Series once again with GMS Racing in the number 94 car. But a crew chief had not been announced at this time. Like I said, I think Dave Ellis is going to remain in the Chevy camp, and I think that he is going to be the crew chief for Ty Dillon next year. And I think that Dave Ellis has been a very good crew chief for that number 19 this year and for the last couple of years, especially with Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson has had his best season as a NASCAR Xfinity Series driver. He's had a great year. Now, my big question is, who's going to be the crew chief for Noah Gragson? Honestly, I really don't know who you have going into next year. Maybe they shuffle up what Junior Motorsports is going to do. Maybe they're going to shuffle up, maybe put Mike Bumgarner over with Noah Gragson, perhaps. I really don't know, to be honest with you, though, what's going to happen with Noah Gragson on the crew chiefing side of things. I think Noah Gragson, if he has a good enough crew chief, that could really help him. But at the same time, I really entirely don't know what is going to happen with Kurt Busch in regards to Noah Gragson going next in regards to crew chiefs. But it's to see that Dave Ellis is going to Cup next year, I think he absolutely deserves it. He's been a really, really awesome and a great crew chief, and I'm very intrigued to see where he'll go next year. I think he ends up at GMS, but we'll have to wait and see what happens, and hopefully we'll find out really, really soon what's going on with Dave Ellis and what team he is going to next year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Matt DiBenedetto. Now, Matt DiBenedetto was recently on Davey Siegel's podcast, where Davey Siegel works at Frontish. He was on Davey Siegel's podcast, and he says that he's working on a partnership for next year, and he is actually going to be hosting partners this weekend at Phoenix, and will be posting some of these partners on social medias, which is a little bit of update in regards to Matt DiBenedetto. Now, I think that this partnership is not a ride. I think that these partnerships are just potential sponsors that are going to be potentially sponsoring Matt DiBenedetto next year. What partners could sponsor him? I entirely do not know, to be honest with you, but one thing that has Matt DiBenedetto's been really struggling with is trying to find sponsorship and trying to find funding for next year to be able to get into a NASCAR Cup Series ride or even a ride at all next year. Because one thing about the sport nowadays, it doesn't matter how good of a driver you are. You're going to need to have talent, and you have to try to find ways to go out and get sponsorship. And we're really, really wanting to know what has been wanting to go on with Matt DiBenedetto for next year. And it looks like we leave at least somewhat of an answer to potentially what is going on. Now, my big question is, where does Matty D end up next year, potentially rise? I don't think Matt DiBenedetto is going to end up in the NASCAR Cup Series. I think he's going to end up in either Xfinity or Trucks. There aren't that many Xfinity Series rides available because Xfinity Series, that series is starting to fill up right now. There's not as many good rides in Xfinity left. So maybe he goes all the way down to the Truck Series and runs there next year. I really don't know. But at least there's good news and at least a silver lining that probably going into next year at some point he'll probably at least have some funding. Because again, funding is going to be the cake thing for Matty D. That's why he's out of a ride at Wood Brothers next year, because Harrison Burton is going to that 21 next year because he has funding, which has worked with Team Penske, because Dex Imaging, which has funded Harrison Burton for pretty much his whole entire Truck Series career. It's also part of KHI Management. They wanted to move him into the 4 camp because, of course, his dad worked in the 4 camp pretty much his whole entire career, really up until the second half of his career. He went over to RCR. But at the same time, funding is a major, major important thing to making sure you can keep yourself in the sport. And I'm glad at least he's still working on that right now. But we'll probably find out what maybe is going on for next year, hopefully soon. Because again, we only have 3 months till the season technically starts. The season technically starts with the Clash on February 6th at 8 o'clock East, at 7, I think it's either 7 or 8 o'clock Eastern. And hopefully we'll find out more about where it's going next year. Hopefully we'll find out more about that really, really soon. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode. as we're talking about Lawless Allen. As Lawless Allen is going to be driving full-time for Nice Motorsports in 2022, driving the 45 car full-time. It had already been announced that Carson Osbar will be driving the 42 car full-time in 2022, and it had already been announced that Dean Thompson, who will be making his Truck Series debut this weekend at Phoenix, he'll be driving the 40 truck as well. Now, Lawless Allen has already made, I think, a couple starts so far for the 45 team. Now, a lot of people, myself, thought he was maybe going to go to Raymond Brothers Racing full-time, but when he started making some starts for Nice Motorsports this year, that really changed because Lawless Allen has, like I said, made a few starts in the Truck Series, and I think this is his third start with the 45 team for next year. Now, Lawless Allen, I think, does have a little bit of talent. The thing is, though, he hasn't really been in that great of equipment until now, and I do think the 45 team, while I don't think that they're a top-tier organization, we've seen Carson Osbar run really, really well with them this year. He's been a driver that is really was a contender in the playoffs, made it to the round of 8, and was really, really fast. But I also think, of course, it's because Carson Osbar is an absolute freaking beast behind the wheel. For a guy, especially only 18 years old, this guy is someone that needs to be talked about for a long time. Because the kid knows how to get it done. But Lawless Allen has been pretty solid. I mean, he's ran top 30s and was running in the top 20, I think, at Darlington before he had issues, if I remember correctly. So he had issues with Derek Cross. I think he got spun out. And he actually was running pretty well. So the goal for Lawless Allen next year is to try to get as much experience as possible and maybe try to finish top 20 in points. I know that's a very, very low goal, but the Truck Series next year, they're going to have some more really good talent coming into that series next year and some really, really good drivers in that series and maybe expansions for other teams as well. And there's going to be good teams. We know that Bill McAnally's team's going to Chevy, and they're expanding to 2-car operation. We know that some teams may be expanding next year in trucks. So I want to see what Lawless Allen can do next year. I think the goal is top 20, get some top 10s, and maybe somehow get some top 5s, and maybe somehow steal a victory. Who really knows? But again, a lot of people are like, well, Nice Motorsports, they should do better. At the same time, Nice Motorsports lost their funding with GMS Racing and lost a lot of that backing and support when they dropped their GMS partnership after 2019 when Ross Chastain moved up to Xfinity Series full-time in 2020 to go to College Racing. So, Lawless Allen going full-time with Nice Motorsports. I'm actually really happy about this guy. I actually do like Lawless Allen quite a bit. So, I'm really happy to see that Lawless Allen is going to be going full-time with going full-time with Nice Motorsports in 2022. I hope he does very, very well, and I hope he does get a very strong run next, and hope he does really good well this weekend at Phoenix. I hope he qualifies very, very well and has a good run so they can have some momentum going into next year at 2022 full-time for Nice Motorsports. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jeb Burton. Now, Jeb Burton was on another NASCAR YouTuber on his channel, Eric Sepp's channel, and he says he'll be racing full-time in 2022, and he hopefully will have an announcement soon in regards to where he is going next year. It was confirmed that Jeb Burton would not be returning to college racing at all in 2022, and he's looking for somewhere to go next year. My question is where is Jeb Burton going to go next year? Because honestly, I really do not know where he's going to go. Now, the good news for Jeb Burton is he does have funding from state water heaters, and that definitely is going to help him have an opportunity to land somewhere next year. But my question is, where does Jeb Burton end up going next year? I do have one potential place a couple places where he maybe could go. I don't think he's going to be going up to the Cup Series next year. I don't think there's a lot of Cup rides available. Maybe he ends up, if he does go to Cup, though, maybe he goes to Spire Motorsports, but I think Ryan Preece could end up going there, though I also think that Ryan Preece could go to DJR Racing's Truck Series program in 2022. Maybe he ends up part-time. Well, he wants to run full-time, so he's not going to end up in college. Maybe he goes to another Xfinity Series team like a Tory Racing, perhaps, because Tory, we know that they're looking to run full-time with their 61 car, of course, at MBM support, but they're running to run full-time in Xfinity, and Austin Hill's going over to RCR next year. Maybe he goes there, but probably not going to go there. Maybe he goes to Team Penske next year as full-time in Xfinity, but we know that they're probably going to be an all-star team, so I think he may end up going back down to the Truck Series, maybe running for Tory Racing's Truck Series program. Though I do think that Corey Heim or Tyler Ingram will end up there. So I really do not know where Jeb Burton's going to go. This is definitely really, really intriguing because I do not have a clue where Jeb Burton is going to end up next year. But honestly, I really do hope that Jeb Burton ends up in a good ride because I know that this year he's probably been the worst running driver of the 3 college guys that have ran this year. But at the same time, I really do want to see Jeb Burton get another good opportunity because the guy did really well at Junior Motorsports last year. And I know, like I said, he's been the worst performing driver at college racing this year. But at the same time, he's really not been that bad. So I do hope he gets another opportunity. And it does also help that he has sponsorship and funding from state water heaters that has been funding him since back in 2007, 2008, when his dad also had sponsorship from their company. So it's not just he's got funding from State Water Heaters. His dad doesn't own the company, but his dad has basically had that on his car back for a very, very long time. So I do hope that Jeb Burton gets a good ride next year. I don't know where he's going to end up, but hopefully we'll find out an announcement soon, because there is an announcement potentially coming for Jeb Burton very, very soon. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Maya Sider. As Maya Sider is going to be going full-time in NASCAR Xfinity Series once again, driving for Jordan Anderson Racing in 2022 in the 31 car. Now, RCR announced when it was announced that he would not be returning to that team, that they were going to be looking to put him in an RCR affiliate team. Jordan Anderson Racing is an RCR affiliate team. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Maya Sider. I really do like Maya Sider. The thing is, though, Maya Sider this year, I'll be honest, has been very, very disappointing. Like I said, I really do like Maya Sider. I want to see Maya Sider succeed. The guy's really got a good personality on social media and does have some funding from TaxSlayer, which is bringing in a lot of funding, and probably does help the Louisiana Hot Sauce. Is probably going to be helping funding some of his team next year. But at the same time, his time in RCR definitely has been disappointing. He does have one win this year coming at Homestead, but I expected Maya Sider definitely to be better this year. And honestly, like I said, he hasn't been that impressive. He's not been terrible, but for the standards of RCR, again, this is the first year they've been full-time since 2019, because last year they had 2 drivers on part-time basis. So they had multiple drivers going in at one time. The thing is, though, I did expect him to perform a little bit better this year, and he's getting beaten points by guys like, I think Brandon Brown's almost beating him in the points right now. He's getting beat in the points, I think, by Jeremy Clements, and also I think he's getting beat in the points right now at this given moment by Riley Herbst, who's not been really that impressive this year. And if you're an RCR car, I know those cars aren't absolutely the greatest, but you're in an Xfinity Series, you should at least performing at least some sort of capacity a little bit better than that. And I expected a little bit better from him, but at the same time, it is his first full-time year in Xfinity, so I'll give him a little bit of a pass. Now, going into next year, I want to see this team contend for the playoffs. They don't have to make the playoffs next year, in my opinion, because you're going to have a lot of good teams next year, but I think the goal is to try to make the playoffs next year. You're going to have, again, you're going to have some teams coming in next year that are looking to expand and run very well. RCR expanding to a 2-car operation, of course. We don't know what a lot of the other organizations are doing, but at the same time, he's got to next year going into Jordan Anderson Racing. He's got to do well. And Jordan Anderson Racing has shown that they can be capable of contending for top 10s and even top 5s at points. They've got some top 10s this year. They've been a team that have been really, really impressive. And I know that their Truck Series program has not entirely been that great. But at the same time, I do really want to see Jordan Anderson Racing succeed, and hopefully they can do that with Maya Sider. I think Maya Sider does have potential to do that and does have the capabilities to do that. So I do really hope that Jordan Anderson Racing can succeed going into next year, and I hope they can do that with Maya Sider. I do, like I said, I do want to see the team succeed. I hope they do that going into next year, and I really, really hope and pray that he does have some good runs next year. The goal is trying to make the playoffs. If he can do that, that'd be really, really awesome. I hope he does that, and hopefully he'll do very, very well going into next year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the potential practice and qualifying format that could be coming next year. Now, Mark Crystal, who does work for Front Stretch, reported, he was told by a source that, and this is just a rumor, keep this in mind, but he was told by a source that practice for the NASCAR Series next year will be a 20-minute practices. Then half an hour later, it'll be a 10-minute group qualifying session. Also, teams must practice and qualifying race on the same set of tires, or else automatically start at the rear of the field. Now, the practice does make a lot of sense for 20 minutes, but here's the thing I want to talk about. What is the point of bringing back practice qualifying if it's going to be like this? Because this is not how you do it. And again, at least it's better than nothing, right? But at the same time, there is not enough practice here. 20 minutes of practice, that is not enough time for these teams to adjust on the cars. And what we've heard is that they're going to be impound sessions. So what is really the point of doing this? And again, this is not the right format. And group qualifying coming back? Are you serious? Group qualifying got taken away because, remember, in 2019, they brought the 550 package out, and it turned into these glorified sessions, and we're going to have the 550 package now. We haven't seen the 550 package with the new cars, and it may be different with the next-gen car than what we've got than what we've got right now with the Gen 6 cars. But at the same time, I don't understand why bringing group qualifying back. I know the F1 is very, very successful. But another thing that I want to say is that this basically is taking away from the weekend. Now, at least practice qualifying will probably be back next year. And again, this is not entirely confirmed. But at the same time, if this is what we're going to be seeing next year, I'm not a fan of it. I think that this is absolutely horrendous. I know a lot of people agree with me on this, and it hurts the weekend experience as a whole because it hurts the weekend experience for the fans. And there are tracks that are charging a ton of money. I'm looking at you, Gateway. You guys are charging over $100 for tickets, even for people that already paid. Though there's probably going to be payment plans where you can set up and stuff. But these tracks are charging a lot of money, and you're taking away from the weekend experience. Now, again, I don't think, we've learned that we don't need 2 or 3 hours of practice. I think we need one happy hour session that's 1 hour long, and you need single car qualifying, because I fear with group qualifying, you're going to end up having issues with the aero problems, and it's going to turn into mind games once again. There's a reason why NASCAR took that away, and I just don't entirely understand what NASCAR is thinking right here. I think that this absolutely will be bad. Again, it's not entirely been confirmed, but we've heard 20-minute practice, so this might end up being true. And this guy does work for Front Stretch, who does have a little bit of source information in regards to that. So I hope it doesn't end up being true, because if it does, this is going to be a terrible look for NASCAR, and I think it'll be really, really bad. So I hope it does not end up being true, but there's potential that it could end up being true going next year. I really, though, hope that it does not end up being true for next year, but it might end up being true for next year. So hopefully it does not end up being true, though. Now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Chip Ganassi Racing. According to Adam Stern, Chip Ganassi says that being able to sell his charters on the way out of NASCAR team ownership has been a big help to him, very much so. That adds to the asset base of the team. Without the charter system, all you're selling is a bunch of used cars, the buildings, and the equipment. A lot of the owners, I mean, I'm not personally a big fan of the charter system, but a lot of the team owners like it because when it comes to selling this stuff, and this at least is a benefit, when you are selling an organization, you can build that back up and bring a lot of funding back into your organization. So it definitely makes a lot of sense to sell this. Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense for some of these teams to sell, but at the same time, if you want to sell your team right now, this is definitely the perfect time, and you can sell a lot of money. It's unclear how much Chip Ganassi Racing sold, again, though it's expected they sold it for a lot of money to Trackhouse Racing, because Trackhouse Racing not only just bought the whole Cup Series organization, but they bought the charters too. So that at least is eventually $12 million each for each of the charters. So they probably spent close to $30 to $40 million Trackhouse spent to buy up those organizations. It also is probably going to be able to help to cover the DC Solar bills if they have to get into legal situation and legal trouble with DC Solar, though I don't know why DC Solar has legal grounds on that. But Chip Ganassi Racing's team success in NASCAR has been really, really awesome. Though they've not been a top-tier team throughout their career, they've scored 24 Cup Series victories, a lot of those coming from Kyle Larson and Sterling Marlin. Also have gotten a couple wins from Kurt Busch in the Cup Series, and also Jay McMurray in the Cup Series as well. They've won quite a few races for a team. 24 wins for a Cup organization is pretty solid, and they're going out on a pretty big high note with Kurt Busch making the playoffs this year, getting a win in Atlanta in pretty dominating fashion, and shown pace throughout the year. But like I said, they will be shutting down at the end of the season, which definitely sucks in some ways, because I'd like seeing Chip Ganassi Racing continue into the next-gen era, but he's got other ventures he's been focusing on. Of course, he's got ventures, like he's got IndyCar venture, which they're expanding. We'll talk about IndyCar just a little bit in regards to Indy 500. You've also got the Extreme E Series that they're currently invested in. Also got the IMSA Series that they're also invested with the Cadillac programs next year as well. So Chip Ganassi Racing success in NASCAR has been absolutely awesome, and I'm ready for the future. And you never know, Chip Ganassi Racing could make a comeback, because you've seen other organizations come back into other respective series. Chip Ganassi Racing has jumped out of IMSA, then they've come back into IMSA. Maybe in the future they'll come back to NASCAR, maybe like Jimmie Johnson perhaps. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but Chip Ganassi Racing talk about the charter system in some fashion, in some ways. It's definitely interesting. You can sell your assets and have a lot of money bring back, but it's a lot of money that they are getting back, and that's why they're investing into more upgrades in other aspects in other areas, and so we'll see what goes on in the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Zane Smith. Now, Zane Smith confirmed that Zach Sterletto and someone, I can't remember exactly who it was, I think it was Cantley Crandall, and he confirms that he has been signed by Chip Ganassi Racing as a backup plan and replacement for Kurt Busch before the team was sold this summer. And he says that he right now does not have any rides going into next year. Now, I know the Door Bumper Kurt podcast has said that Zane Smith was most likely going to go to Chip Ganassi Racing before the team basically sold. Now, I want to talk about Zane Smith a little bit, because Zane Smith, I think, actually is a very, very talented driver. And the thing about Zane Smith, though, he doesn't entirely bring a lot of funding. I know that Michael Roberts Construction has sponsored Zane Smith, but that's really all the sponsor he has. So I'm a little bit surprised they're going to go to a driver like Zane Smith, though I will say that they do have some funding from teams like Credit One, which has sponsored him, and other organizations that have funded him, and other sponsors that have funded them as well to keep Zane Smith and Chip Ganassi Racing along. Now, the thing I've been worried about Zane Smith was going to go to Cup is I don't know if Zane Smith would entirely be ready to make the jump from trucks to Cup. Now, Zane Smith, though, does have some Xfinity Series experience. He has raced in Xfinity. He raced for Junior Motorsports back in 2019. So he does have some experience in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, but I'd be worried if Zane Smith was going to get eaten up. He definitely, I think, for sure would not have made the playoffs in 2022. I just don't think he would have been able to do that. Now, he would have been working with Ross Chastain, which both drivers would have been very, very solid. And I do appreciate that at least Chip Ganassi Racing was thinking about putting him in their organization. And Trackhouse have potentially been looking at Zane Smith as replacement, but I guess funding became the big thing. And Justin Marks was thinking about buying that up. But when Trackhouse Racing bought it up, that unfortunately brought his opportunity. Now, like I said, Zane Smith's future in NASCAR is uncertain at the moment. Now, I think Zane Smith could go to College Racing Xfinity Series program. I think that potentially could be where he ends up next year. But the thing is, he's going to have to bring funding. And with Nutrien Ag dropping their sponsorship, I don't know if he's going to end up there. But with my Sider not going to college like I originally thought he was going to go to, he may end up there. So who knows what's going to happen with Zane Smith going in next year. We'll wait and see what happens. It's definitely interesting, though, that he was potentially going to go to the college potentially going to go to Chip Ganassi Racing next year. I think he could have been very, very successful in the long term. Not in the short terms. I think he was going to struggle with Chip Ganassi Racing, but again, it was a new car, so we really didn't know what was going to happen. But it's definitely interesting that Zane Smith was being considered to go to Chip Ganassi Racing next year if they were going to be around. But when Trackhouse bought it up, unfortunately, those plans fell awry. So I do hope he finds somewhere to go next year, as I think he deserves to be racing in NASCAR next year, and hopefully he'll find a place to go to going into next year, as I think he absolutely deserves to go to a really good team going into next year. He made the Final Four this year and won a race in Marshall, so hopefully that'll help him get an opportunity to go to a team next year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Denny Hamlin. Now, Denny Hamlin was speaking to the media, and he says that he is content with his career and is happy where it's at. And he said he could retire anytime now, and it doesn't matter what happens this weekend. He can retire at any moment now, including this upcoming Monday. Now, Denny Hamlin's definitely saying that is very, very interesting. And I saw a lot of people saying that Denny Hamlin, is he going to retire? Is Denny Hamlin going to retire now because he said this? I do not think Denny Hamlin's going to retire next year. Denny Hamlin's really, really weird because he can say some things and then basically just continue on racing for 5 years. He said he could race for 5 years. He could race for a very, very long time. And then he said he also could retire in the next week or so. Now, Denny Hamlin's had a very, very awesome career, 46 career NASCAR Cup Series victories. He's been racing Cup since 2005 and started racing full-time 2006. Denny Hamlin, though, I think really wants to win a NASCAR Cup Series championship. And I think Denny Hamlin, he's really, really on fire in the media center this past week. He was very, very spoken. He's very, very passionate and was saying a lot for 2021. He seems very, very composed and was very, very talkative and was talking about a lot of stuff, including about Billy Scott, crew chief for potentially next year for Kurt Busch. But Denny Hamlin, I think that he's got a few years left. I don't think Denny Hamlin's going to retire at Monday. But you never know. He could pull Carl Edwards, and I talked to multiple people said he's probably not going to do it. But we saw Carl Edwards in 2016. We didn't know what was going on with him, and all of a sudden he announced retirement on my birthday in 2017. He announced retirement, which was absolutely shocking. I don't think anybody saw that coming, that Carl Edwards was going to retire. People thought Carl Edwards was for sure going to be racing for a couple years. And I do think that Carl Edwards could have been a very solid contender in NASCAR, though you never know. Carl Edwards could make a return in NASCAR. But at the same time, I don't think Denny Hamlin's even close to being ready to retire at this point. I think he needs a little bit more time. I think it'd be really cool to see him at least come out and at least race for a few more years. And then I think in the future he will go into the ownership role. I know a lot of people bring up that maybe like Ty Gibbs was maybe going to replace him. And again, Ty Gibbs is not ready for Cup, guys. He's not going to go to Cup next year. If people are thinking he's going to go to Cup, I think they're jumping the gun. But you never really know what's going to happen. And they probably would go, honestly, they probably would go with Brandon Jones, to be perfectly honest, since he's been with Joe Gibbs Racing for quite some time. Though he does have a contract with Joe Gibbs Racing for next year. He did sign for next year full-time with Menard's backing. But you never know. He could go full-time if Denny Hamlin retires. But I don't see Denny Hamlin retiring, guys. I really don't. I think that Denny Hamlin's going to be in NASCAR for quite a bit of time. I think he's at least going to be in the sport for a few more years. And remember, he did sign a multi-year contract extension with Joe Gibbs Racing, which is another reason why I don't think he's going to be retiring. So we'll wait and see what happens, but I don't see Denny Hamlin retiring. I just think that Denny Hamlin is content with his career. He's had a really great career. He's got the second most wins as a driver that's not won a championship, just behind Jimmie Johnson, who won 50 career NASCAR Cup Series races without winning a championship. Denny Hamlin is just 4 from tying that, so we'll wait and see what happens, but I don't see Denny Hamlin retiring at the conclusion of the season. I just don't see it happening, guys. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Andretti F1. Now, Michael Andretti did confirm that the rumors were true, that he was looking to potentially buy the Sauber or F1 organization from Alfa Romeo. Now, he said in the media center that his deal did not fall through because of financial issues. He says it was control issues. That definitely was really, really interesting. Now, the initial report in potentially buying up the Sauber organization was they were potentially going to buy 80% of the organization. It was going to buy up a Swiss bank or Swiss company and take 80% of the ownership stake from that organization. But it really started kind of unfortunately falling through where they didn't have a car for Colton Herta for him to test and be able to go out and do practice for the team. And when they did announce at the USGP, that unfortunately fell through. Now, Michael Andretti did confirm that if they were going to go to F1 next year, that Colton Herta was going to go full-time with their organization next year in Formula 1, and that Kyle Kirkwood was actually going to be taking that ride next year if they were to do it. But unfortunately, with them not doing it, that means that they're going to have their full team. Davide DiFrancesco was announced yesterday that he'd be returning full-time to their organization. But Michael Andretti did not rule out that he's not ruling out the possibility in the future of maybe looking to potentially go back and trying to get an F1 ride. But I do definitely find it interesting that it wasn't an issue of finances. Because, again, finances weren't a problem, but it was an issue of control. My assumption is that Fred Vassar probably wanted a little bit more funding, wanted a little more control than just 20%. He probably wanted to be 50-50, but I think Michael Andretti wanted a lot more control. Now, Colton Herta still potentially to F1 long-term. I don't think that Colton Herta should go to F1. Again, the good news is for Colton Herta fans is he's still going to be in IndyCar next year. And I think that Colton Herta, honestly, could win an IndyCar championship next year. Now, if he wins an IndyCar championship, he could eventually go to Formula 1. I mean, he could eventually go to Formula 1 with the IndyCar championship, because I think that's ultimately what he wants to do. And he's only 21 years old. He's young enough to do that. But it's definitely interesting for sure that they were thinking about bringing Colton Herta to Formula 1. They were looking at it, and this deal was really, really true, and the rumors were true that they were looking at it, but the deal unfortunately fell through. So that unfortunately sucks. And I feel for Kyle Kirkwood, too, in this situation, because Honda's allotted how many engines they're going to have, and I mean, there's talk that maybe he could go to Ford, but there's also been talk maybe he could go to McLaren's IndyCar program, because McLaren may expand a 3-car operation to IndyCar next year. They're keeping Felix Rosenqvist and Pato O'Ward next year, but they may bring over Kyle Kirkwood next year, but he may also go to Foyt next year. There's a lot of intrigue around the IndyCar silly season. There's a lot of unknowns, because we know that Nico Hulkenberg, he's not going to IndyCar next year. He confirmed that on social medias. So maybe he ends up going there, but at the same time, I don't know what entirely is going to happen for the future of Andretti. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. But the fact that he confirms that it wasn't an issue, it was a finance problem, is definitely interesting. It was just a control problem, which sometimes you're going to have control issues like this. It's something that sometimes comes up long term, and definitely interesting for sure that it wasn't financial problems in regards to the Andretti F1 program. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Denny Hamlin versus Alex Bowman. Now, Denny Hamlin was speaking to media yesterday during championship media availabilities, and he says that Alex Bowman has not talked to him about Martinsville, which he views as a lack of respect. Basically said it is a lack of maturity, and then he says that a lot of these drivers lack originality, and he says that he's glad to help drivers bring out that originality. Now, to give a little bit of a backstory, Denny Hamlin and Alex Bowman got into it after the race. Now, it wasn't any punches or anything like that thrown. They were battling really hard for the win. Alex Bowman gave back Denny Hamlin the spot about 19 laps to go, and then Alex Bowman was cleanly trying to work around Denny Hamlin, and they had a clean battle. Then Alex Bowman overstepped it going into the corner, and unfortunately kind of got into Denny Hamlin. I don't think intentionally got into Denny Hamlin, but unfortunately ended up wrecking Denny Hamlin for the race win. Then he ended up winning the race. Denny Hamlin then went out there and kind of unfortunately went out there trying to stop Alex Bowman from doing his burnouts. Then they did dual burnouts out there. And then Denny Hamlin got out of the car and basically called him a hack and called him fucking terrible. That's exactly what he said. Now, I understand Denny Hamlin's frustration, because Denny Hamlin was going for the win. Again, I would definitely absolutely be frustrated if I unfortunately got taken out for the win. I know a lot of people reference what Denny Hamlin did to Chase in 2017, because again, Denny Hamlin is not entirely wrong Again, Denny Hamlin went on Twitter, talked about all that stuff, but at the same time, Denny Hamlin's also caused problems in the past, but again, it was 4 years ago. People can change from 4 years, and it is what it is. But also not giving a call is definitely interesting, because Alice Bowman did say that he was going to talk to him and was going to call him, and the fact that Denny Hamlin says that is definitely interesting. But after you called him a hack and called him terrible, said he was behind all the other 3 Hendrick cars, though he's not entirely wrong that Alice Bowman has been the worst performing Hendrick car this year. I do think that he for sure has been the worst performing Hendrick car this year. But at the same time, I don't think that Alice Bowman is a hack. He didn't, and then basically said on Twitter that he got basically there because of no money, which Alice Bowman is one of the last driver that really came from funding. Alice Bowman actually had to work his ass off and got discovered by a guy like Dale Jr., which, by the way, both of them got discovered by Dale Earnhardt Jr., and he got in the hard way. Unlike a lot of drivers in NASCAR today, he actually did get in the hard way. So, again, I understand Denny Hamlin's frustration because Denny Hamlin got taken out for the win. But at the same time, after you call him a hack, I don't blame Alice Bowman for not really wanting to call you, man. I mean, I really don't honestly understand the frustration. Again, I understand the frustration, but at the same time, I understand why Alice Bowman hasn't called him, because calling him a hack, at least apologize and say he really wasn't a hack, because it wasn't intentional. It's not like, what Chase Briscoe did, because what Chase Briscoe did was egregious. Again, he's gotten dumped twice the last 10 weeks, which will cost him regular season championship, which could have been really, really beneficial to having more points than Kyle Larson, because he actually got 5 or 6 less points than Kyle Larson ended up getting for his regular season title, which could have been big, beneficial, and crucial to getting a little bit more points and a little more cushion in the points, but he was able to make the championship for, which at least is a positive. But at the same time, this beat's definitely interesting. I don't expect it to boil over going into next week. I don't think that Alex Bowman is going to cause any problems with Denny Hamlin. And Alex Bowman at least admitted that, again, Alex Bowman he didn't feel sorry. But again, he didn't say that he intentionally wrecked Denny Hamlin. He didn't intentionally wreck him. And we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to the future. Hopefully these things are sorted. Again, I want to see Denny Hamlin and Alex Bowman race cleanly. Hopefully they do race respectively going forward, and we don't see any more problems between these two, because I don't want to see these two have any more problems going forward. And hopefully things for both of them get sorted out, things get straightened out going forward, and hopefully things are not having more issues going forward between these two. Now we're going to jump on to the first of 3 major stories of today's episode, as we're talking about Ryan Newman. As it was confirmed in a post by Castrol that Ryan Newman will not return to Roush Fenway Racing in 2022, even on a part-time basis, and this will be his last race at Roush Fenway Racing this weekend at Phoenix. Now, I saw a lot of people basically saying, oh, this was already confirmed, we already knew this. Well, that actually is not entirely true, because there have been talk maybe that Ryan Newman could move a team on a part-time basis next year, and if Ryan Newman couldn't find a ride for next year, that he was probably maybe going to come back. But what this tells me is that, one, either Ryan Newman is going to end up retiring at the end of this year, or Ryan Newman is going to end up at another team next year. Now, Ryan Newman, I think, has said in the past that he's had offers from multiple organizations. A couple organizations I think that Ryan Newman could end up with. The first team, and this is a team that apparently has talked to Ryan Newman for next year, is Rickware Racing. Now, Rickware Racing is expected to downsize either a 2 or 3 car operation next year, and going into next year, they have an alliance with Stewart-Haas Racing. So they're also going to be getting engines from Roush Yates Engines and have a big expansion with that, and they're having a big alliance with the team. So Rickware Racing is going to be making upgrades next year. So this potentially could be where Ryan Newman ends up going next year. He could end up at the team going into next year at Rickware Racing. Another team he could end up going to next year, and this is another possibility, is Front Row Motorsports. Now, I know people have been saying maybe Garrett Smith lead to 38, but again, Rickware basically confirmed that that's not true, and he said, where sources did you hear this from? So it's not going to be Garrett Smithley. Now, Ryan Newman potentially at Front Row Motorsports is definitely interesting. Ryan Newman knows how to get it done. He knows how to get it done on the cars, and he's been a driver that's been very, very successful and knows how to work on it. So those are the 2 potential teams, at least on a full-time basis, that I could see him end up going to. But Ryan Newman at Roush Fenway Racing, definitely, he's had a pretty solid career at Roush Fenway Racing. He's not won a race for the Roush Fenway Racing camp, and I do think the crash in 2020 Daytona 500, unfortunately, I think affected Ryan Newman's performance. Because before that, Ryan Newman was very, very solid. He was a driver that still could contend for top 5s and top 10s, and almost made it to the round of 12 in the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs in 2000. I think he actually almost made the round of 12 in the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs in 2019 in that 6th car, and almost contended for wins as well, almost winning at Talladega in 2019 in a photo finish between, I think it was Eric Almirola, and I think it was it Eric Almirola and Denny Hamlin, or Ryan Blaney? I don't entirely remember who was in that 3-wide finish, but he was in a 3-wide finish with those 2 drivers. And Ryan Newman, if this is the last time that Ryan Newman is going to strap into a car, the dude absolutely is almost considered a Hall of Famer, and I think he could be a Hall of Famer one day. I don't think for sure first ballot Hall of Famer, but one day could be a Hall of Famer in NASCAR, and I wouldn't be entirely shocked. He's won the Daytona 500, which he won that in 2008, and has won 18 career races, which for drivers, not a ton of drivers that can say that. Maybe like 40 drivers can say that they've won 18 races, which is pretty good for a driver in their entire career. And like I said, I know Ryan Newman's last couple years hasn't been entirely that impressive, but we know him for him being a great driver when he won a lot of poles, and he's done a lot of good stuff in his career, and I do hope that Ryan Newman is able to find his feet somewhere, because it seems like the first year he goes to a new team, he actually ends up being very, very successful. So I do actually hope that Ryan Newman ends up in a good ride next year. Hope he does find a ride, but if this is his last full-time race and his last race in general in NASCAR, I think that he's had a great career. But I'll be honest, I don't think Ryan Newman is done fully in NASCAR. I think he is still going to be racing in some sort of capacity next year. Hope that we'll have to wait and see what happens, but I hope Ryan Newman is able to find a great ride going and good ride going into next year. I hope that happens for him because I think he deserves to be in a good ride next season. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we are talking about Jimmie Johnson. There was an article released by Jenna Fryer from the Associated Press, and she basically said in the article that Chip Ganassi Racing confirms that they will have 5 cars for next year, and it's officially confirmed that Jimmie Johnson is going to be running the Indianapolis 500 in 2022 for Chip Ganassi Racing. Numbers and associate teams have not been announced yet, but there are some theories behind which team could be backing that car. I think there's potential that Jimmie Johnson could do a double where he runs the Clash with Trackhouse Racing, and the 48 car becomes a Trackhouse Racing affiliate team with Jimmie Johnson and uses that car with Chip Ganassi Racing helping out. Since Chip Ganassi Racing is going to be selling their stuff to Trackhouse Racing in the Cup Series, and Trackhouse Racing really don't know what's going on with their plans, if they may have another car for the Clash. I know Jimmie Johnson has teased potentially going back to NASCAR, perhaps. He said maybe he might run on a one-off basis. The Clash, I think, definitely would be running the Clash LA Coliseum. I think you're going to have some retired drivers that are going to run that event. Maybe like Dale Jr. comes out of retirement. Maybe Tony Stewart comes out of retirement. Who really knows what's going to happen? But I'm really excited to see that Jimmie Johnson is going to run the Indy 500 next year. I think the fact that they're going to have a driver like Jimmie Johnson in the series next year, basically, he won't run all the other ovals, but this is the only oval he's planning to run. But the fact that they're going to have Jimmie Johnson running the Indianapolis 500 2022, that is going to sell a lot of tickets, and a lot of fans, including NASCAR fans, are definitely going to tune in. And I think it's also going to help the ratings next year as well, more than it helped this year. Because this year's Indy 500, I believe, was the most watched Indy 500, I think they said, since 2011. So they're going to have a lot of people that are going to be watching the Indy 500 next year, including NASCAR fans who've never watched Indy 500, are probably going to watch Indy 500 now because of Jimmie Johnson. And you look at the potential lineups for next year, you're going to have Romain Grosjean in there too, who is going to be running full-time for Andretti Autosport in the 28 car. You're going to have other rookies like Dave Malukas is probably going to be there, Devlin DeFrancesco, and you have a really good rookie class. And maybe, just maybe, you may have Kyle Larson running for Team Penske next year. There's been talk about Kyle Larson maybe coming over to run the Indy 500, and depending on what happens this weekend in Phoenix, that could really help his case of potentially running the Indy 500 next year, because again, depending on what happens this weekend, he may run it. And Team Penske, they only got 3 full-time cars, but there's talk of potential 4th car for Kyle Larson to run next year. But back to Jimmie Johnson. I know that Jimmie Johnson has struggled on road courses this year at IndyCar. There's no doubt about that. He wasn't that great on road courses. But in IndyCar on ovals, I think he actually will be very, very successful. He had a really good test at Texas, and he showed a lot of progress and did show a lot of speed. And I do really think that next year we could see Jimmie Johnson be very, very successful in the Indianapolis 500. Because the Chip Ganassi cars have shown a lot of winning pace. Alex Pohl almost won the Indy 500 this year. Julio Castroneves did end up winning for Meyer Shank Racing. But Jimmie Johnson, I think, could be a very, very successful driver in in IndyCar, at least for sure at the Indy 500. And you never know what could happen. Now, of course, he's going to have to qualify, which I think that's going to be easy for Jimmie Johnson. The Chip Ganassi cars have generally qualified very, very fast. And generally, even drivers that haven't been amazing, like Max Chilton, he's led a lot of laps in Indy 500. So I could definitely see Jimmie Johnson having a chance to be very, very successful, at least for sure in the Indy 500. I think he qualifies in for sure. I think he'll have a lot of pace. And Jimmie Johnson, the fact that he'll run the Indy 500 next year on itself is really, really awesome. I'm looking forward to that because I'm really happy to see that we're going to have a legend, another legend in motorsports like Jimmie Johnson coming in and running the Indy 500. It's really, really awesome, and I'm looking forward to that for sure. And now we're finally going to jump into the final major story of today's episode. as we are going to talk about 2311 Racing. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern on Tuesday evening, and he says that despite its talks with Front Row collapsing at the 11th hour, 2311 Racing remains in advanced talks with other teams, and is still expected to have a second charter in time before the 2022 season begins. They are trying to get a charter for Kurt Busch as they are expanding to a two-car operation next year. And really up until the last minute, there had been looked like that they were going to get a charter for Front Row Motorsports, but the deal fell through, and Front Row Motorsports is expected to remain a two-car operation next year. They were in talks having a partnership with Front Row next year, take that charter, and Front Row was talking about moving over to Toyota, but when it was announced they were remaining in Ford next year, that basically changed a lot of plans for the organization as they will remain to a two-car operation. Now, we're still looking for a charter for Kurt Busch next year. Now, they are, like I said, it looks like they're in advanced talks with an organization. My question is, what teams are they potentially looking at talking to? Because, again, there's not many charters that are available. I think of two teams potentially they could be looking at. The first one, of course, I think of is Rickware Racing. Now, Rickware Racing right now, we don't know the plans for their team for next year. Again, we expect it to be a 2 or 3 car operation going into next year, but we don't entirely know what's going on with their charters, because the Petty Ware charter could also be in jeopardy for next year, and that's one that might end up getting sold. Maybe they take that Petty Ware charter for next year. That potentially could be the case. Of course, Richard Petty the Petty Motorsports would have to play a role in that, which Petty Motorsports, again, I don't think Petty Motorsports is ready to be a 2-car operation right now. I just don't think there's potential for them to be a 2-car operation with the funding issues that they have had. So I think that maybe they sell that charter and give it to 2311, which I think, let's be honest, Rickware, if they are to downsize next year, the better they're going to be. Because I think the fact they at least are for sure downsizing next year is going to be good for the team. I think that they actually will be a better team. Downsizing from a 3-4 car operation to a 3-car operation plus the Alliance is going to help them next year. And giving it to a team like 2311 Racing will make 2311 Racing a better organization too, because you'll at least have both cars funded, and it will help in next-gen parts as well, because the teams that are unchartered tend to get their stuff a little bit later than the teams that are chartered. Look at NBM Motorsports. They didn't get their stuff till the last minute. But the other team they may end up getting it from, and this is a shocking one too, Spire Motorsports and Starcom. Now, Starcom Racing is expected to sell their charter to Spire Motorsports. What if Spire Motorsports goes ahead, and again, they lease this out with Trackhouse, but what if Spire Motorsports goes ahead and either sells the charter to 2311 or leases it out to 2311 Racing? That's a big question, because I think Spire Motorsports could be a 2-car operation next year, but I think they also could sell that charter next year and get the money from that and then give it to 2311 Racing so they can have 2 charters for next year. Regardless, I think that they are going to have 2 charters next year, which is a good news. At least this is really, really good news that they are going to have 2 charters next year. If they were going to have one car that wasn't going to have a charter next year, that would have been a big issue. Now, another big question is, how much is that charter going to cost? Because we know that the minimum price right now that they're expected to be is $12 million. So they're going to be a lot of money. So the big question right now is, how much money are they going to be willing to spend in regards to the charters? That's one thing we're going to have to wait and see in regards to that. But at the same time, at least there's somewhat of a positive to the story that at least they're going to get a charter next year. Again, I think they absolutely deserve a charter. They're a team that actually has potential. They've been a team that's been improving every quarter this year. They've gotten 2 positions better of an average finish, and Bubba Wallace having the best average finish of his whole entire career in a single season by 2 positions. Last year he had a 21st place average finish. This year he has a 19th place and does have a win this year with 2311 Racing, and the acquisition of bringing Kurt Busch in the team is really, really good for the organization as a whole. So we'll wait and see what happens in regards to the charter, but it looks like that they will be getting a charter very, very soon. Hopefully it's announced very, very soon, and they will likely be getting a charter here soon. So anyway, that is it for today's Law NASCAR news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel with notifications to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support page on the description below for that, and comment your thoughts on today's video. What team do you think they're gonna get the charter from? What team do you think they're gonna get it from? Let me know that in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Jimmie Johnson running the Indianapolis 500 in 2022? Let me know that in the comments below. Anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video. I'll see you guys next time. Championship week begins. We got championship videos dropping for the next couple of days. We'll talk about each of the champions, and you guys will see that on the channel here over the next couple of days, including later tonight when the Truck Series race is concluded. I'll see you guys next time for that video, and we'll see you this weekend. Take care, everybody.